So the left-leaning European leaders are facing a crisis of confidence. They're struggling to maintain public support. What is interesting to note is that leaders like Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz and Pedro Sanchez are seeing a significant drop in their popularity, sparking some serious concerns about their leadership and also the future of European politics. In the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer's approval ratings have nosedived. A recent Ipsos survey has now revealed that while 61% of the people have expressed dissatisfaction with his performance, only about 27% of the people have expressed satisfaction. And this has made him the most unpopular Prime Minister after 5 months in power in Downing Street since the late 1970s. In France, the situation is even more complicated. Emmanuel Macron's government that has been facing significant challenges after his party's defeat in the 2024 European Parliament elections and also the disastrous performance in the snap elections in France. In a bid to try and stabilize the country and to steer its economy, Macron has now appointed François Bayrou as the new Prime Minister. The appointment comes after Michel Barnier's government was toppled in a no-confidence vote following tensions over public finances. Now, the centrist leader Bayrou's top priority is, of course, to get France's 2024-25 budget approved without facing a no-confidence vote. Macron recently had vowed to remain in office until the end of his 5-year term in May 2027. In Germany, Olaf Scholz is also facing the heat after his 3-party coalition government collapsed due to a budget dispute. Now, Olaf Scholz lost confidence vote in the Bundestag in November, with 394 ballots that were polled against him, 207 in his favor, with 116 abstentions. Germany is now heading for snap elections on the 23rd of February, with Olaf Scholz hoping to win and form a new coalition under his leadership. Now, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is facing a pretty tough time as well, dealing with several legal investigations involving those who are close to him, including his wife, brother and former transport minister. His wife, Begoña Gómez, is accused of corruption and influence peddling related to her time at Madrid's Complutense University, while his brother, David, is being investigated for embezzlement, influence peddling and tax fraud. The former transport minister, José Luis Ábalos, is under investigation for allegedly taking kickbacks for contracts during the COVID-19 pandemic. While the investigations have led to increased scrutiny and have dented the image of Sanchez's leftist government, he and his Socialist Party have dismissed the cases as baseless and part of a right-wing smear campaign. Recently, the Spanish left-wing parliamentary bloc has temporarily blocked the proposal for a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. The proposal was in fact put forward by Together for Catalonia party. So with the rise of the far-right parties across Europe, leaving many left-leaning leaders struggling to connect with voters amidst the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war and the West Asia conflict, it remains to be seen if the European left-leaning leaders can make a comeback. All right, now to help make sense of what is happening with the European political leaders, we're joined by Mr. James Jackson, who's a defense journalist and also a political analyst, and he's joining us live from Valencia in Spain. Mr. Jackson, thank you very much indeed for taking time out and speaking to us here on WION. Let me in fact start off by asking you this. This is a pretty complex situation at this moment, literally from the United Kingdom to France to Germany and Spain. All the leaders who are in charge are facing domestic political crises of their own. With that being the case, do you think Europe can present a united front when it is confronted with the bigger crises that you're looking at, like the war in Ukraine and also the West Asia crisis? What's your assessment on this?
I think there are a lot of different things in play here, as you mentioned yourself. Of course, there are geopolitical challenges, and Europe is dealing with some of them better than it is with others, let's say. But what we've really seen is this year there's been a huge anti-incumbent wave across the Western world, which actually many economists would say is based on inflation, that old beast that we thought we had defeated, but which rose up after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and which reminded us of how important people's pockets are for day-to-day politics. So when the prices of milk, butter, and everything else is going up and up, and wages aren't, that tends to make people dissatisfied with politics, because, you know, your day-to-day expenses are actually very important for how satisfied you are with the world. No one wants to have less money at the end of the month. Europe has not done the best job at fighting inflation. How it could have, given its proximity to Russia and, you know, the amount by which certain members of the Western Bloc, like Germany, were dependent on Russian gas for such a long time, is questionable. In the US as well. I mean, many analysts now are saying that Kamala Harris's only chance wasn't this sort of woke campaign that she put out there, or even this idea of bringing Republicans alongside, but going hawkishly against inflation. And we're not seeing that from Europe's centre-left leaders. And I think if we don't see that from them, we'll see them swept out of office because they're not able to keep people's money in people's pockets.
Right. It's interesting that you were saying that a lot of this, the crisis that you're looking at in the European leadership, has predominantly got to do with inflation. A lot of people will turn around and say that inflation is up because there is a war that is raging in Ukraine, which has driven up the price of gas for a lot of people in Ukraine. Now, the other point that you made is that these are centrist and left-leaning leaders. The question that I want to ask you is twofold. Firstly, do you think the right-wing leaders could have done anything differently to ease the problem of inflation for people in Europe? And secondly, with Donald Trump again back in charge at the White House, who's talking of an isolationist agenda for the United States of America, do you think the problems for Europe will compound with leaders who are grappling with political crises in their respective nations?
I really don't think that right-wing parties would have done anything differently or anything more beneficial. Well, I think in European politics, we do often see different waves. So we had a bit of a red wave with the election of Keir Starmer, Olaf Scholz's government a few years ago, Pedro Sanchez, who's been in power for a bit longer now. And you know, they happen to have quite bad timing, and timing is everything in politics, because no one, when they were elected, expected to be dealing with a war on their footstep, and in many cases it wasn't a war that they had, a war on their doorstep rather, and it wasn't a war which they had prepared for, and in many cases they had actually contributed to the situations which caused it. I'm thinking particularly of the SPD in Germany, which pursued very Russia-friendly gas policies. So the question is, but what about Donald Trump in the US? I actually really believe that, to come on to the second part of your question, we've already seen that he's pivoting away from this inflation-busting question, and his proposal of putting tariffs on his neighbors, as well as, of course, Europe, will mean that in the US, prices will go up for consumers. So that is further inflation. So this protectionist agenda will not help ordinary Americans, considering what American manufacturing looks like now. This isn't the 90s. We're living in a very much a globalized economy, even more so than we were then. So the idea that you can simply close the grain curtain, and grow everything at home is very tricky, and that's going to make things more expensive, and then you're at risk of annoying your voters. So in Europe, where people are being very isolated geopolitically with Trump's election, they did not prepare for it anywhere near as much as they could have. And with Russia looking like it's gaining ground in Ukraine, it seems like, you know, Europe is feeling attacked from both sides, although, of course, or at least possibly attacked from one side, and then isolated from the other side. So it's a lonely time, and it's a lonely time for European centre-left leaders, many of whom are likely to be turfed out of office quite quickly. I'm thinking in particular of Olaf Scholz.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Jackson, for joining us and giving us a very comprehensive assessment of how you see the picture evolving in this very complex politics that we're looking at evolving in Europe. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in Valencia. Thank you.